In the beginning there was nothing, but say for the one thing. You can call this one thing a great many things, for you can see it in just about everything. You can see it in well-formed dew after a night of cold, refreshing, moist air, and a well-made hammer, and a good pint of ale. Just about anything contains the DNA, the essence of this everything. For they created everything. At least their children did, if they didn't create it themselves. But the scholars, doing what the scholars do, came up with a name for this everything. They call it Ingrisha Infernaticus, the great two-headed serpent. Ingrisha Infernaticus lived alone with themselves for billions upon billions of centuries, needing only to talk to their other half. But slowly the dark, dead head of Ingrisha Infernaticus formed a lust for something greater. He lusted for creation, for someone to take care of and lead into a better life, for clay to mold in any way he saw fit. The divine power of Ingrisha Infernaticus swelled in their shared stomach. With his sugar-sweet lips and silvered tongue, the dark head spoke to the light, and Ingrisha Infernaticus created existence. The belly of Ingrisha Infernaticus inflated with the fetus of Kronos and Alarum, the god of time and the god of space. At this time, existence was just but bare elements, a blazing ball of fire encircled by a ring of stone, set in opposing planes of air and water. The lust inside the dark head had grown stiff, and no matter how hard he tried to satisfy himself, making mountains and valleys, he wanted a creation that lived, breathed, that could obey and disobey, love and fear him. So once again, he spoke to the light. And once again, the light bowed to the words of her darker brother. Life was born in the form of the Titans. A second womb formed inside of Ingrisha Infernaticus, next to the womb of the twins Kronos and Alarum, time and space. In this brand new womb laid the fetus of Io, god of life. The Titans lived on the ring of stone, breathed the air and drank the water, and saw through the light of the burning star. The dark head's lust had gone, but it was replaced by hatred as he watched his creation worship the light and turn their backs to the dark. The hatred in the dark grew until he could not stand the light. The dark ran away, tearing Ingrisha Infernaticus in two, and opening the two wounds, giving birth to Kronos and Alarum and Io. The dark half of Ingrisha Infernaticus fled into the deepest, darkest depths of the creation he begged into existence. He shriveled and shrank and gave himself the new name, Asmodeus, creating the 9 hells from his own blood. The light stayed to take care of his children. Kronos, the god of time, was a 3-headed snake filled with the head of a lion, the head of a bull, and the head of a titan. Kronos soon took their job of monitoring the flow of time. Io, the god of life, was an enormous, rainbow-colored true dragon. Io, filled with the same lust of her father, created hundreds of beasts and monstrosities, but they all died in the hostility of the ring. So Alarum, at the request of her sister, made the 26 atmospheres. 3 large atmospheres, known as Pam'Ent, were the favorites of Io. Over the centuries, Io fell in love with Ingoth, a powerful ruling titan. Io ran away from his responsibilities. Io lived a quiet life for a god, spending every moment possible with Ingoth, his lover. For centuries they lived in the far east of the great continent of Pam'Ent, in a palace made from a cave. Eventually, in a moment of extreme passion, they had intercourse. Afterwards, both of them were pregnant. 36 years later, during the middle of the day, Ingoth gave birth to the first of her 2 kids. The second came 12 hours later, in the middle of the night. During the birth of the second child, Ingoth died. The child born during the day was a long, snake-like creature with 12 arms. The creature was the first of the Behirs, also known as the Daymare beast. The one born during the night was a bear-like lizard with long arms and the tusks of a walrus. This was the first of the nightmare beasts. After the death of Ingoth, Io abandoned the kids and flew to the west, where he gave birth 64 years later. Io was carrying 3 children, Tiamat, Bahamut, and Sarador. But during the century-long pregnancy, Tiamat ate Bahamut and Sarador. Tiamat was born with 10 heads, but when she was but 100 years old, Bahamut ate his way out of his sister. All of the children of Bahamut, Tiamat, and Sarador have an inherent hatred of titans and their smaller offspring giants. Io's favorite creations were the Casturknock. The Casturknock had some of the power of their grandfather. The Casturknock and all of their descendants can create gods to worship. Through the centuries of existing, the Casturknock have created hundreds of gods. These gods found the ring overly crowded, so they created the outer planes as their home. Over the years, the pantheon got stronger and larger. Alarum, the god of space, had 5 children that he created with himself. Nyx, the god of the void, the god of the lacking, the god of nothing, the god of whenever something isn't where it's supposed to be. Agni, the god of fire. Houfu, god of earth. Bunzi, the god of the water. Ninlil, god of air. Those are the core 5 gods of the world, the elemental gods. All 5 of those gods had children with each other to create a great many gods. If you want to see the family tree, this is what it looks like. Yes, I had to tier it because it's that wide. There are 4 generations of descendants of Alarum. The first generation is Alarum himself. Then you have the second generation, which is the 5 gods I've previously mentioned, followed by the third generation and fourth generation, where the names get insane. Because the rule with the Sepentine Gods is that the god's name is as many letters as all of the letters of both of its parents' names. The only god who is, and then the longer your name is, the more powerful, the less powerful you are. So a Nyx is far stronger than Chiana Kawada Kwatsi Yatatil. And so yeah, the one god that breaks this rule, the breaking of the rule to prove the rule, is Grim, the god of death, who, while being a part of the third generation of gods, only has a 4-letter name, making him the 3rd strongest. As the Casturknocken gods created the outer realms, the god Kronos, the god of time, split themselves into 3 parts: Kronos Infernos, Kronos Teros, and Kronos Celestos. One stayed on the ring of stone, mainly in Pam'Ent. One went down to the lower planes, mainly living in the 9 hells, and the other, Celestos, went up to the top. Kronos Infernos, the one that went down to the lower planes, has the head of a bull, and some serpentine features, but mainly a humanoid body. Kronos Teros, the one that lives on the material plane, also goes by the name Loki, and often disguises themselves as a crow or a raven and watches events that happen and reads the memories of people and will sometimes yell them out to cause confusion, being the most willing to get involved of the gods of time. And then Kronos Celestos, the one that lives up in the up in the upper plains, mainly in mainly in the Seven Heavens or Mount Olympia. But he has a giant traveling castle that he takes between all of the upper plains, throws giant raucous parties to figure out what the angels and the gods are up to in the upper plains. Casturknock, the members of the Casturknock, as if you'll remember from the last episode, one of the favorite creations of Io, the god of life, have the ability to turn anything that they worship or treat with reverence into a god once they give it enough worship. And all of their descendants share this ability. The Casturknock slowly formed one of the most powerful empires in the history of Pam'Ent, being able to quickly surpass all other intelligent races because when they quickly discovered they had the ability to worship each other and turn into gods. And that compels a civilization beyond what most others were able to do, including even the very powerful and still existing Chromash Empire created by the Chromatic Dragons that at the time was being led by Tiamat herself before she got banished to the Nine Hells. Many political figures of the empire were turned into gods. Most of these gods died with their worshippers during the Battle of Bigport when Tiamat tried to reclaim the empire and defeat it in the name of the Chromash Empire and succeeded. One of the only surviving gods after the Battle of the Opening, the only one, is Helm. Helm was taken with all of the survivors of the Battle of the Opening into the many tunnels beneath the three islands that were used for mining the rock that built the many Casturknocken cities, mainly the capital of Nakban. These worshippers of Helm down in the tunnels worshipped Helm, seeing him as a way to get revenge and as a way to protect themselves from the extraplanar forces that had just very recently destroyed their entire civilization. And that's why they held on to him more than they held on to any of the other political figures turned gods, because he had such a strong military reputation and such a strong extraplanar policy that it made him one of the few people, the only person in the truly long run that they held on to and that got brought back out of the tunnels with them when they finally left the tunnels, no longer being the Casturknocken people, but having spent enough time in there to evolve to be smaller, some of them stronger, shorter, and these are now the races known as halflings, gnomes, and dwarves. The Church of Helm cultivated many branches of paladins as soon as they were in the upper planes, because now that they were in the real world, they could do whatever they wanted. And they created many of these paladins so that they could go out and protect the world now that they were on the surface of Pam'Ent. These included the branches of the Watchers over the Fallen, the Champions of the One True Vision, and the Vigilant Eyes of the God. These groups have one unifying mission: to protect the world from any extraplanar threats. Through the years, many of these paladins have become legendary adventurers because they're always traveling and trying to protect the planes. The Overcomer, known as Gargon, was a member of the Champions of the One True Vision. And Gargon was one of the very few survivors of the Battle of Bigport, and he personally helped Bob Builder kill the Serpentine god Tiamat during the Battle of Bigport. Another very powerful and famous member of the Church of Helm is Nariel, a member of the Eight Winds of Winter, who helped defend the city of Dundare. In the years directly after the Battle of the Opening, Chancellor, one of the few politicians who was not made a god outright via worship, because he just didn't have that kind of following, he was a lich, and Chancellor Vecna, the lich, actually worked together with Tiamat to organize the Battle of the Opening, where the portals opened on either side of the capital city, Nakban, destroyed the continents, separating the 3 islands from one continent into 3 islands, and separating the surrounding continent into 2 large continents known as Draken's Land, and the other one that no one knows about that might be Titan's Land. Vecna then got to work being left alive by Tiamat after the Battle of the Opening. Vecna used a series of rituals to become a god, but instead of being worshipped by living creatures, Vecna was worshipped by all of the souls of all dead Casturknock. And because Vecna had such a large pool of worshippers that just keeps growing and growing and growing and growing, Vecna soon became the strongest of the Casturknocken gods. And he was working with Tiamat for a long time, and eventually all other Casturknocken gods didn't like him because he's ridiculously strong. He's out here doing all of these world-conquering things with Tiamat and trying to bring her back out of the 9 hells. Eventually, he gets betrayed by Cass, and Cass, along with Tiamat and a bunch of other Serpentine gods, banish him from existence. And the only way to bring him back is to connect his hand and his eye to his body, which is somewhere outside of any atmosphere. Humans of the North, children of the children of Sophie, one of the few survivors of the Battle of the Opening who didn't flee underground, wander alone and safe in the far, far north, away from the prison of Lockport, where all of the captured Casturknock were being kept. For centuries, they were godless, unaware of their ability to create gods. These new generations of humans, descendants of the Casturknock, would create weak gods of countless number that were cool rocks that they worshipped, or trees that had weird branches, or wild animals that they saw twice in a row. And they worshipped all of these gods until one day the Sealy Court made a bridge that combined the Fey realm to the actual world. And seeing the Fey, they immediately started to worship the Fey because they were this weird extraplanar thing. And so they created these countless Fey gods, unknowable sort of connection, unknowable ideas. There's no way to know what they're going to do because they have this immense power that they didn't used to have, and they have no alignment, being just these chaotic, neutral beings of chaos and lies and trickery. And the organized religions of the South did not like that when they came to the North. But one did. Helm, who gets brought to the North with the camp of Jonathan Dabak, the first person to lead people up into the North, an eventual first king of Facade. But anyway, Helm gets brought up and falls in love with Murdain, one of the Fey gods. After the Casturknock had been taken prisoner by the devils, fled from the city of Demon Keep, now known as the Elves, they began to worship the sun and created the god Lathander. Lathander soon became the most powerful and most commonly worshipped of the pantheon of southern gods. When he, being taken up north with the followers of his and the other southern religions, with Jonathan Dabak's journey into the north, when he discovered the Fey pantheon, he saw them as a threat. He saw them as a chance for Vecna to be repeated. So Lathander decided to wipe out the Fey god pantheon. He did this by ordering his followers to do crusades into the north, where they murdered all of the followers of Fey gods. This went on for centuries, with wars between the north and the south being led by the Dabaks, who were at first tried to do peace and eventually even switched sides, shockingly enough, with going against the Ren Sun Empire and fighting for their own and creating the Kingdom of Facade, still subjugating the people but giving them more freedoms than they would have had. But at some point during this war, with years of war, no one knows whose side, reaches out to the Great Serpent for help to try to completely destroy their enemy. The great serpent responds by descending upon the earth and creating hundreds of Tarrasques that walk across the entirety of the three islands, destroying mage towers and cities and mountain ranges and killing 90% of all the population of Casturknocken descendants, being humans, elves, halflings, gnomes, dwarves. 90% of them get murdered by Tarrasques during this, at the peak of this war, during an event known as the Trampling. During the Trampling, Selena and Murdain, two of the Fey gods, come down to try to help their supporters. They flee with their supporters into a cave known as the Cave of the Founders, who this was one of the first places that the Bach camped out in when they were going up north for the first time. These survivors were jumped by a group of crusaders on the side of Lathander, and Lathander himself, who attacked the now weakened gods as most of their survivors are being murdered in front of them. As these now weakened gods, as most of their worshippers are being murdered in front of them. They get super weakened, and Lathander comes over and converts them to be in his image and creates two new gods and kills these gods for being Fey gods and creates two new gods known as Enoch and Lectum. These original gods' personalities and everything immediately gets wiped, which pisses off the god Helm, because he was in love with Murdain, and now Murdain is dead, and now this random god called Enoch that's doing weird shit. Along with Lathander, the early elves worshipped the harvest as it came every year, creating the god Chantia. The god Chantia and Lathander were lovers. The worship of Chantia never spread as far as the worship of Lathander did. It is still mostly located in the south with the elves, by the elves of the High Hedge mostly. In the faith of Chantia, they put the bodies of the living into trees partially, and then the trees grow around them as they decompose. And this leaves the markings of faces in trees. And the entire mage of High Hedge, the hedge mage of High Hedge, is made up of these trees. And so as you're wandering through it, you'll sometimes see the face of a dead guy, which is a fun time. Lectum, when he was created by the god Lathander, was assigned a domain at random. He was given the domain of organized combat. This means that he mostly is worshipped by people who really love trial by combat or fighting pits or gladiators. Like, they're just people who want to fight the strongest enemy. And so he has some of the strongest followers, although he has no real organized religion. It's just sort of random people that follow him that fight shit. The most powerful of which being the Executioner. Enoch, when he was created by the god Lathander, was also assigned a domain at random. Enoch was given the domain of childbirth. Enoch is worshipped by midwives and nuns. Lathander, Chantia, Lectum, and Enoch are considered a part of the Lathandrian pantheon. So if you're a follower of Lathander, you also recognize these other gods as being worth worship, even if you don't always worship them yourself. Quadrupapa is the newest of the Casturknocken gods, being created by tradesfolk who always were traveling around and fixing up houses. Became a myth that this one specific potato was lucky. So many of them would pray to this potato, leave its offerings, and then travel somewhere safely. Slowly, this created the god Quadrupapa because they were worshiping this potato, and it became a god. One of the greatest spreaders of this religion, talking about it the most and getting the farthest, was Bob Builder, who eventually became the famous adventurer Saint Sir Bob Builder, who is famously the one who had the last blow and killed Tiamat, the Sepentine Gods. And yeah, that's the gods of, that's the Casturknocken Gods. There's many others. Like, really, with how the Casturknocken Gods being created by people, you really can just bring me any god if you want to play in a game with one, and I'll let it exist. But these are the ones that already exist. I have crazy lore for. The non-Casturknocken people worship a great many things, and many of them are very powerful. But without being of Casturknocken blood, they are not able to create gods purely through worship. So instead of creating gods through worship, they just worship already powerful beings. And we'll go through a few of those now. Although the list is a lot less defined because anyone can call anything a god, really, so we'll check off a few very fast. The Aarakocra of Erevan, one of the islands in between Dragonsland and the Three Islands, they worship harpies. They worship these very powerful harpies, these bird-like, god-like creatures that can change the seasons briefly and live in caves and large nests and are summoned ritualistically every 10 years. These harpies are very powerful, although nothing compared to like a real god or even a dragon. Like they're strong compared to humans and they're compared to the Aarakocran, but like they're not impossible to fight. They're not impossible foes. There are many mortals who could probably 1v1 one, although that's with a shit ton of magic. Another creatures that are worshipped a lot, and this is getting into like just think of warlocks and other things. The devils have a lot of influence in the material plane, especially in the Three Islands, because for a long time after the Battle of the Opening, the devils had a prison and a colony in the city that was then called Lockport, but is now called Demon Keep. They had a prison and a lot of power, and they laid a lot of bloodlines. That's why tieflings are so common in my world, and all of them seem to be from the south, and specifically Demon Keep, because they were a presence for so long that they changed the gene pool, and they left around enough people talking about them for them to get worshippers on a fairly regular basis from the Three Islands. And they have a much smaller presence. They have a much smaller presence in Dragonsland, where you already have dragons and other things to worship, and they don't stand out as much, and they never had a foothold. Because Tiamat never gave them one, but she allowed them to have one in the Three Islands. Devils of the modern day, of course, have the city of Orbia, because with the River Styx now running into material plane, they set up yet another colony, although 3,000 years later. City of Orbia, if you're unfortunate enough to be there, is where a lot of deals are made, and a lot of, like, if your soul's going to be sold to a devil, it's almost certainly going to happen to Orbia. Because it's a lot easier for a devil to force someone to make a pilgrimage to the city of Orbia than it is to just give them a deal out of nowhere, making it much rarer for the like crossroads deals to happen. They still do, but it takes more out of the devil, so they only happen when they're truly gaining a lot. So it has to be for a soul or for something bigger, where devils will make smaller agreeances. There's not crossroads deals because the devil's not getting anything out of it, and they never make a deal that's fair. Humans also receive some worship in the Three Islands, mainly from the Dracovans living in the wasteland and having followed Tiamat, and now just being alone after Tiamat died. They're just looking for things to worship. So they worship the demons of the wasteland a lot because they're nearby, they're powerful, they're scary. There's particularly a group of Dracovans that worship the Sherbaliks, the disgusting flesh creatures, because they're very common in the wasteland, growing like cancerous growths under the sand and then rising above to start feasting on people, with draining the iron from the earth to create their chains. And they have many worshippers who wear chain bracelets around their arms to signify them as worshippers of the Sherbaliks. Baphomet, one of the many demons left in the wasteland after the Day of White Skies, has a great many worshippers, almost all of them being minotaurs, but a few other people branch out. And they, of course, not being Casturknocken, don't turn him into a god or give him any power, but he makes them into soldiers, so that gives him a lot more power than he would have otherwise had. Fae are yet another faction of creatures that receive a lot of worship, mostly from non-Casturknocken races. Any of the races from the Feywild by now are no longer considered Casturknocken. The high mutation happening from the ridiculous rates of arcane energy flying around because of the twin sons of Feywild. The twin sons, of course, just being the son from the Shadowfell that was moved to the Feywild in an act of war crimes. Very powerful, themselves dividing into two factions, the Seelie and Unseelie court. The Seelie being an organized group of Fae that have a council and have laws. They're nothing like real laws, but they have a code. It might not make sense to mortals in any way, shape, or form, and it probably cannot in any way, shape, or form make sense to a mortal, but it makes sense to them probably. So they follow it to a T. There is no spirit to a Fey law. Like that, the idea of a law having a spirit, having a way that's supposed to be followed that isn't marked out in the print, is an idea completely foreign to the Fae. Like a devil knows of that idea, and they will use it a lot. They will tell you this is the law, implying that the spirit of the law is one thing, and then turning it on you and using the letter of the law, and can sometimes do vice versa, where they tell you the letter of the law but not the spirit of the law. That's much rarer for devils because it's harder to pull off, to like have a gotcha by being like, this is what you meant, and just because you thought that you could get out of it by doing something more specific, we knew what you meant. We're a devil, so we're going to hold you to that. But the Fae don't have any sense of that. The Fae don't believe in the letter of the law. That doesn't exist to them. Laws are just structure, and it doesn't make any sense. It's like looking at like an Art Nouveau statue. You don't understand how it's not falling over, but it isn't. And that's sort of how the Fae work, where it doesn't make sense at all, but it keeps them in order, and that's all it needs to do. And then the Unseelie Fae live outside of the Seelie court, and they just sort of do whatever they want. They're just there to mess around, make fun. Like, be merry, and drink a lot is like their motto. They tend to mess the most with mortals, although all of the Fae mess a lot with mortals. It's fun for them to do. Whereas devils sort of mess with the Fae for material gain, or demons do it just because they're crazy, and dragons, who do receive a little bit of worship but aren't trying to receive a whole lot of spot because it's more of a like faction than a religion. It's more of a political leader than a religion with dragons. Whereas like with the Fae, it's a warlock relationship. It's not just, this is my president. There are also a great many undead or magical figures that command worship. There are many liches through the years who have forced their followers to worship them. But again, unless they're Casturknocken, which has happened a few times, although never enough to ascend someone to godhood before they stop doing that shit. And it's very rare for people in the modern day to know that they can turn people into gods. That's why you don't see it happening all over the place.